Our final project today deals with a very sensitive and often contentious topic of legal-assisted dying. Obviously, there are many theological issues involved with this. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court of Canada has paved the way for the legalization of physician-assisted death, which has tremendous implications and poses huge dilemma for medical personnel and for persons in ministries. Susan Chisholm is a candidate for ministry in the United Church of Canada, tackled this important topic in her research with physicians of faith and legal-assisted dying. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. A woman walks into your office. You know her well. She has a degenerative neuro disorder that is terminal. She and her family knows what's ahead. Gradual and continual decline to physical incapacity, mental incapacity, and ultimately death, possibly by suffocation. She says to you, I want some control over this. I want assistance to die. It is my right. A man walks into your office. You know him a little. He suffers from chronic and uncontrolled pain, the result of hard living, he admits it, fights and accidents and nights on the street. He survives on social assistance and the food bank. He is socially isolated. He never mentions family. He says to you, I am barely living with this pain. I want assistance to die. It is my right. A man walks into your office with his elderly mother. You know them, you've known them for years. She used to be a real go-getter, but now she lives with dementia. She is very calm, but wary. She does not ask you why she is there, and she does not recognize who you are. Her son says to you, she never, ever wanted to end up like this. We want her to be assisted to die. It is her right. And one more. A young man comes into your office. He's barely out of his teens, but he has been in and out of jail. At age 5, he was apprehended from the home by social services, and then later diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. He was moved from foster home to foster home, as families found that he was unmanageable, unpredictable, and increasingly violent. He says to you, my life is nothing. I know it. I want assistance to die. And if you don't help me, I'm going to do it anyway. I could go on. 1 year ago, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that a person who is competent and who suffers from intolerable, endurable, unremediable suffering cannot be denied the right to assisted dying. And on June 6th, the right to die will become Canadian law. Following the ruling, a parliamentary panel was formed to advise the federal government on how that right to die should be entrenched in law. And it released its report 2 weeks ago on February 25th. The recommendations of that report give us a sense of what's coming in June. The panel recommends that assisted dying be legally available to people with terminal and non-terminal medical conditions, be available to people with mental illness and psychiatric illness. It also recommends that consideration be given to legal assisted dying for mature minors and for people with dementia who give prior directive. The panel recommends that hospitals and health centers be legally required to offer the service. This includes Catholic institutions. and that physicians be allowed to abstain from offering the service but be legally obliged to refer a person who seeks assisted dying to a physician who is known to provide the service. The panel is in agreement with the Supreme Court of Canada that physicians should be fully responsible for deciding who meets the criteria and therefore who will be assisted to die and who will not. It will no longer be a decision of the courts. That responsibility now rests with physicians. When the report was released, the co-chair of the panel, Rob Oliphant, said this: "We trust our medical professionals with our lives every day. This is a committee that also understands we can trust them with our deaths." The question is, how do physicians feel about that trust? My study asks specifically, how do physicians of faith feel about legal assisted dying in Canada? Since the Supreme Court ruling, there has been a great deal of discussion in the medical community and in the public forum. I'm sure you've seen it. But no one has systematically looked at this question. In August, the Canadian Medical Association did conduct a survey of its membership to ask whether they intend to participate in assisted dying or not, just to get a sense of what they were dealing with. Of the 1,400 respondents, only 29% said that they would agree to participate in assisted dying. 63% said they would refuse. 8% were undecided. Of the 63% who would refuse, 1 in 4 said they would not be comfortable referring a patient to a colleague for assisted dying. Since then, the Canadian Medical Association has largely been focused on procedural and regulatory questions. They have a very short timeline to deal with that. So the numbers of this particular survey are helpful, but they're incomplete in terms of giving us a qualitative understanding, right? And interestingly, more and more medical studies do actually pair quantitative data with qualitative data in order to understand complex phenomena. And assisted dying is a complex phenomena. My study is qualitative. I use grounded theory methodology. This is an appropriate methodology for this particular question because it doesn't start from a theoretical position. I didn't begin this study with a hypothesis of how physicians of faith feel about legal assisted dying. This is important because in broader society, there can be assumptions about how Christian physicians feel about this, that there is a uniformity of a Christian perspective or position on legal assisted dying. Not so, says the literature on Christian ethics. Christians are a diverse people, we know that. And they are as subject to the human condition as any other. And the literature says, expect diversity, expect ambiguity. So I set out to ask how physicians of faith feel about legal assisted dying in Canada. I didn't advertise this study through churches, as many of the projects you've seen were done. I advertised it through the medical professional body Doctors Nova Scotia with an invitation to participate on an online survey. 23 responded, and they answered 4 questions. 2 were very specific. What is your medical practice? And are you willing to participate in a follow-up interview? But the other 2 were very open-ended. How do you feel about legal assisted dying? And how will you resolve your concerns? Most participants gave lengthy response, so there was a wealth of data. Of the 23, 12 agreed to be interviewed in a follow-up interview, but I only selected 4 because of time and scope of this. Interview number 1, I'll just quickly give you a notion. The reason I want you to understand about who these people were interviewed is because I chose them to reflect the wealth of data that was already coming in from the respondents. And they do. Interview 1 was a specialist physician in an urban tertiary care practice, early career, and a member of the United Church of Canada. This physician is in favor of physician-assisted dying with reservations and qualifications. Interview 2 was a generalist physician in a rural practice, later in career, raised a Roman Catholic and currently a member or at least attending the United Church of Canada. in favor of physician-assisted dying with reservations and qualifications. Interview 3, a specialist physician, varied urban practice, hospital and community medicine, mid-career, Roman Catholic, opposed to physician-assisted dying. And interview 4, a generalist physician in a varied urban practice, community and medical education, mid-career, Roman Catholic, personally opposed, but professionally uncertain. In grounded theory methodology, everything is data, and so you need to know that, yes, the interviews and the survey responses are part of our understanding of this picture, but in fact, reports and commentaries and even media items or news items are also considered data. Legal-assisted dying is an evolving reality for physicians and for all Canadians, and this particular methodology can accommodate that. It involves a constant comparison of everything that's relevant. So when we see things coming forward and changing, we go back to the data and we compare and we question and we ask new questions of the data in order to understand. That's another reason this is a good methodology for any topic, especially a social topic, that is changing before our eyes. In the case of physicians of faith and legal-assisted dying, a core theme emerged very early and very clearly in the data. Physicians of faith are concerned. More detailed analysis led to this particular emergent theory that guides my whole study. Physicians of faith are gravely concerned because the responsibility of legal-assisted dying does not align with their sense of authority, identity, capacity, and support. We can think of it this way. Physicians of faith are gravely concerned because the responsibility for assisted dying that has been given to them by the Supreme Court of Canada and the Government of Canada does not align with their sense of authority, identity, capacity, or support. And this has implications for the Church. So let's look at them one at a time. Authority. This won't surprise you, or it shouldn't, but physicians of faith are asking the question, it's a theological question, who has the authority to end a life? Some participants were very clear, God, and God alone. Whoops. There are commandments. You do not kill. It is not my power to create someone or to eliminate someone. I'm not God. I just do not think that we have that authority. Others are not so certain, but they do wonder. And if it is God's authority to end a life, is Canadian law about to entrench and require an act of sin? Then there are others who recognize that the physician's role in this is as an agent of care or an agent of death, but that agency doesn't presume authority, and that, in fact, God's authority over life and death is not threatened or undermined by the agency of the physician. One said that, if I am wrong in this, I hope I'd be forgiven. This diversity of interpretation, by the way, of authority, is fully represented in broader theological discourse. What is most specific, though, to this study about the issue of authority is the implications that it has for physicians' understanding and acceptance of the notion of patient autonomy. You've heard or at least read about that term a lot in the media, because it is, in fact, the fundamental principle of the Supreme Court ruling and the coming law. It's also a cornerstone of medical practice. And one participant in particular was surprised and also a bit disturbed that the principle of patient autonomy is made less certain when it is applied to assisted dying. She said, I guess I'm starting with the question, does a patient really have the right to end their own life? Do they have the right to end their own life? The most tragic things I have been involved in were suicides because of the effect on the lives of others. This relational aspect that she raises at the end was raised again and again and again, possibly a reflection of the relational nature and imperative of Christian faith. The decision to end life affects the lives of others. And so participants ask, is it truly an autonomous decision? If that's even possible to be autonomous when it affects the lives of others? And what about physicians' authority to effect such change in the lives of others, especially family members who may not agree with assisted dying and who did not ask for it and who will be deeply troubled by it? No physicians quoted St. Paul, but I will. In Romans 14:7, Paul says, "The life and death of each of us has its influence on others." This is a concern. Let's turn to identity. Identity is complicated, as it is for all of us. Physicians have a sense of personal identity, professional identity, and religious identity. How those identities manifest and combine or oppose one another is highly individual, and it's not necessarily well understood or articulated by those interviewed. This was very interesting because, in fact, in most other areas, the physicians were very articulate and analytic. But in terms of identity, some could simply say, "It's just not me. I can't explain it." It might be helpful for a moment if we do together something that one of the physicians asked me to do in an interview. He said to me, and I will say to you, imagine that it is you who will decide whether I am going to live or die. I've come to you and I've asked for assisted dying. We have gone over and over the options for you, for me, and I still say I want assistance to die. So today is the day, Wednesday at 3:30 in the afternoon. You come into a room and you find me there with my family, and you wait while we say our goodbyes. And then you ask me, "Are you sure?" And I say yes. You give me an injection and you watch me die. Then you check my vital signs and you turn to my family and you say to them, "She's died." You sign your name to the death certificate, and then you turn and you leave and you go on with your day. There are some physicians who say, "That's not me. I understand the procedure. I can imagine how it will all go down, but it's not me, and it can't be me." Some say it quietly, some said it adamantly, "It's not me." Some said it angrily, "It's not me." One said, "I did not go into medicine to be a killer." And it was another who said, "I went into medicine hoping to be a healer." Now, that word healer is actually the most commonly used word in terms of physician identity, healer. I am a physician to be a healer. One explained it this way: assisted dying requires a huge shift in thinking and emotional, moral, and ethical perspective. It's not just a ruling, and medicine was never just a set of rules that we follow. You know, it's about healing. Interestingly, these words could be almost word for word the writing of Stanley Hauerwas, a theologian who writes a lot about Christian ethics. Now, this disconnect with identity was probably the least consistent finding of this study. And so it's important to understand that not everybody feels that way, that it's not me. A number of physicians spoke about compartmentalizing aspects of their identity. And again, it was not particularly articulate, but what they were saying is, essentially, I can do this as a physician. I'm not sure I can do this as a person. Not one said, I feel called to do this in order to alleviate suffering. Or even, I will do this. I can do this. Not one said that. There were a number, at least a third, who said like this, that they did not say that they would not participate in assisted dying. Do you see all those negatives? They did not say that they would not participate. So this reveals, I think, a kind of ambiguity, right? No one said, I am called to do this work. I've seen it in the paper, someone said it, but I didn't hear it from any people that I interviewed, these physicians of faith. It would be very interesting to follow up with those who did not say that they would not participate, to follow up with them and ask them later, did you? And how did it feel? Because I think that the reluctance to say fully that I am called to do this shows an ambiguity in terms of their sense of what they should do. We should pay attention to this, I think, because our identity or the issue over identity, as inarticulate as it was, is, I think, going to come back as an issue later once this has been implemented and physicians have practiced it. Moral life is less about compartmentalized identity and more about the small actions of everyday existence, isn't it? And that can have a cumulative effect on the minds and the spirits of all of us. And so I'm not sure, when it comes down to a sense of identity, whether we can underestimate the difficult reality that participation in assisted dying may bring for physicians of faith and their sense of self. Capacity. This one's so much easier because my soul, they talked about capacity. This category held the most data because it has to do with the responsibility that physicians have been given to assess competence and also degree of suffering. And there's a lot of concern here. These two areas are fraught with subjectivity and ambiguity. Interestingly, participants are not particularly concerned about procedure or regulations. They trust that this will be clearly done and well implemented by the association. What concerns them is the complex reality of implementation and the variables and the gray areas that are inevitable. Everyone's definition of suffering is subjective. There's no way around this. You cannot experience anyone else's suffering. It's theirs alone. Enduring and intolerable suffering is an entirely subjective concept. What is livable to one person can be utterly beyond another. Participants in this study have considerable experience with patients suffering in all manner of physical, mental, psychiatric, spiritual, social conditions, and they went on at length about the ways that suffering and competence can be confounded. It can be confounded by pain, by cognitive ability, by addictions, family dynamics, financial or social hardship, mental, emotional, spiritual illness. All of these things can confound competence and suffering. The physicians talked about this with a degree of empathy that I found to be heightened and probably more attributable to their faith than to their professional calling. The risk of coercion was another thing that was named. And this is difficult to assess, according to the physicians, particularly psychosocial coercion. I don't know if you've heard about that, but this is when someone has an internalized sense that their family or society would be better off without them. It's not this notion of someone saying, you should die. It's the internalization of that says that I am worthless, or my family would be better off without me. Jean Vanier says that this is a constant message in our society to people who are not productive, who are not capable, who are not contributive. Physicians are very concerned about this because how do you assess that? Or worse, how do you address it? You'll remember that the chair of the parliamentary panel said, we trust our medical professionals with our deaths. But medical professionals are not so sure about that trust. The practical side of this, said one, is that all of this takes time to be dealing with not only the patient's issues, but the family's issues and the record keeping, to do all of this and continually make careful, informed, and right decisions. And then he shook his head. Another one said, physicians are just human beings. We get tired, we get rushed, we make judgments, but death is final. There is no room for error, and this concerns me. You know, there is no fail-safe diagnostic tool for assessing competence and intolerable suffering. The physicians were concerned about the inevitable inconsistency of assessment from one doctor to another. One may agree when another might say no. Based on a physician's decision, a patient will live or die, and participants see this as an enormous responsibility. One said, "How will I know?" And then she said it 3 more times. How will I know? How will I know? How will I know? The final concern, or category of concern, is support. There's this widespread agreement, I would imagine even in this room, that legal assisted dying should be one option, and preferably the last one, when all other options have been exhausted. Participants, though, made the point that that's really easy to say, but it's essentially meaningless because of limited availability of palliative care and hospice services, limited availability of mental health services, home care, and other social supports. Without true access to these supports, decision-making around suffering and assisted dying is colored and constrained. That's the reality. One said, "I am convinced that we have the means to alleviate suffering in all patients with intractable or terminal illness, and I don't think I will ever be persuaded that hastening death is the solution. But patients must have access to those services, and it bothers me that so many, or most, don't." And another said, "I don't believe that it is a sin to take one's life. I just believe that it is a failure to our patients to not be able to relieve suffering when a cure is not possible." Do you see the ambiguity in this quote? How will this physician feel participating in legal assisted dying? We don't know, and he or she may find out. That leads to another aspect of support that raised concern for the physicians, and that is lack of support for physicians themselves. What of the ones who choose to abstain? Will there be professional ramifications for them? Most think not, and consistently participants said that they thought their peers would respect their decisions, and they were not at all worried about saying out loud that it is because of their religious belief. But some do question whether the law will have the same respect. And interestingly, the parliamentary panel 2 weeks ago bore out that concern. You'll recall its recommendation of a legal obligation to refer. And we know that for some, to refer is to be complicit in the act of assisted dying. Others mention that counseling and caring that will go into the process, whether or not they do the procedure themselves, they are fully into it when they talk with people and counsel them and answer their questions. And then, of course, there's the ones who actually will perform the procedure and assist someone to die. What effect will that have on physicians, and what support will there be for them? This is an unknown, and it is concerning. Are physicians the ones to do it? They may be the best choice, but are they adequately tooled? Are they adequately supported? Is there something to protect them from the mental anguish? Another said, if you have any doubts or mistrust the process, or if you feel that people are pushing patients one way or another, that could cause your own emotional mental suffering. To feel you are not doing the best for your patients, I don't know. Seriously, I don't know. Physician stress, one said, even PTSD for some is a real possibility. Assisted dying is more than a procedure. It is a gray, gray, gray area. So, physicians of faith are gravely concerned because the responsibility for legal assisted dying, which the Supreme Court of Canada and the Government of Canada says is theirs, does not align with their sense of authority, identity, capacity, and support. What does this mean for the church and for you and me within the church? There's plenty for us to discern. Let me offer to you today 2 suggestions that come out of one scripture, Galatians 6:2. Bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Physicians of faith are gravely concerned. Can we help to bear the burden? One of the questions on the survey asked, how will you resolve your concerns? Not one respondent said, I will turn to my church. A few said they would pray. Most said they would wait and see what the legislation and regulations are and then consult within the profession. I think it's important for you to know that several of them said that they are considering leaving medicine over this issue. That's serious. So the fact that no one said, I will seek counsel from my clergy. No one said, I will talk with others in my faith community and see if we can sort this out together. No one said, I will turn to the church, is reason for us to take note. And also reason for us to turn to them and to offer support and help and to show them that we can actually share the burden. We need to openly and purposely talk about the responsibility that has been given to physicians and ask them, as this question did, how do you feel about legal assisted dying? And then we can explore with them pastorally and theologically whatever comes up. It's not enough for us to say that we agree or disagree with assisted dying. And it's not enough for us to say to the physicians, as the parliamentary panel did, we trust you with our deaths. This research shows that we need to engage in theological conversations about the sanctity of life, dignity of life, Christian care and responsibility, suffering, death, choice, autonomy. And it would be most helpful to physicians if we could frame the discussion in terms of authority, identity, capacity, and support. I think we can be brave about this. The physicians in this study were pretty clear that discussions of law and medical procedure are not actually helping them to find a footing in the ambiguity of reality. There may be tension in the conversation that we have over this issue, and we can expect diversity. But like all good theological questions, there is room to explore different perspectives, and we should be doing it together. I have a second suggestion to offer, and I will close with it. We, the church, bear responsibility for the vulnerable and for the suffering. We know that, but we might carefully examine to what extent we do that. The reality of legal assisted dying in Canada means that we may need to redouble our efforts to advocate vigorously for palliative care, hospice, mental health services, and other support services, and to show compassion and afford dignity to all people, the weak and the strong, the suffering and the healer. What would it mean to physicians of faith? What would it mean to all of Canada if we stepped up and we showed by example? Galatians 6:2. Bear one another's burdens, and in this way, fulfill the law of Christ. Thank you.
thank you, Susan, for that important research, very thorough research. And I'm sure everyone here has learned a great deal. Are there comments or questions for Susan?
I want to congratulate you for observing what wasn't said. It's so easy to count up the things that were said. To note the things that weren't said is something that we sometimes forget.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was just incredible. As a mental health professional, as a physician, who unfortunately I didn't respond to Doctors Nova Scotia, and I apologize for that, because this is a daily event at this point, dealing with some of these issues. Earlier this afternoon, I came away from seeing a patient who looked like your second patient, a veteran, whose PTSD was terrible, and who coped with that through substance use. I don't call it substance abuse because that's pejorative. Substance use that was his option at the time as he perceived it. Unlike the government having apparently some trust in physicians to make this type of judgment, this patient is very paranoid. I'm a mental health professional. He's so paranoid that he thinks at this point that physicians are in collusion because we want his organs for organ donation. He signed a card when he has a driving license. And now that physicians are coming up to this new responsibility and this new sort of right, I guess, as well as the patients, he's afraid. And so we're going to have to cut him loose from support. We're not going to be able to continue to see him because he truly, truly believes that we are colluding with each other in terms of using his body for ulterior purposes. He's a frightening fellow in that he basically accused us today of just, sort of making his life miserable and profiting and billing for seeing him when this is really what we want to do. But unfortunately, he's not ill enough, and he does have the right to resist hospitalization. So he's basically untreatable. He's very, very paranoid. He's had altercations with the police, and he thinks we're totally untrustworthy as physicians. So it's an indirect way that physicians are involved with this new legislation. Thank you. Do you have a comment on that? It's just, I came away demoralized. I was basically so pleased to be able to have somewhere to go at 3 o'clock and just to leave the interview. But
Good. Well, you're welcome here.
Thank you.
Like I said, it was a very compelling presentation on a very complex topic. I wonder, in the 4 people that you interviewed, I noticed that the 2 who were opposed were Roman Catholic, and the others weren't specified. Did you see correlation across your sample of attitudes to denomination? And may that then affect how we collectively as the church support our physicians?
So I did not specifically ask people's denomination, aside from the ones who I interviewed. So that's only 4 of 23. I didn't ask because I wasn't looking for that kind of data to do that. That would be another study for sure. So I cannot say that there is any sort of alignment like that, because there may be Catholics who did not claim that they were Catholic who are willing to participate in assisted dying. What we do know is that there is not uniformity. And so to say that that Catholics only feel this would be probably inadequate or inaccurate, and likewise for United Church, or Anglican, or Evangelical.
Susan, that was great. Very compelling and most articulate, I think I've heard the topic for some time. A number of bishops recently have stated what they will do or what they will direct their priests to do, which I find very troubling. Just to a question and a statement. The statement is, this decriminalizes something that's happening today, which I think is a fact that we don't talk about a great deal, but it does happen, and we call it different things, pain management. So that's interesting. I wonder if there's parallels to the decriminalization of abortion. And finally, I guess any law that makes a professional an agent of the state, I think, is a flawed law, and I think that's what this law does. So I'm wondering if you had a comment on that. Hopefully there's a question in there somewhere.
Can you say the second part again about the agent of the state?
Yeah, well, so in effect, the state is saying that this act is now legal or
Yes.
decriminalized, and it is because I'm directing you to do it. And so the professional becomes an agent of the state, like
Right.
a police officer has the power to arrest people, and that's the authority that's given to them, but they're agents of the state. So the doctors are in effect becoming agents of the state in this law. And so I could see where there's a conflict. Yeah.
So in terms of agent of the state, I mean, in many ways, we all are agents of the state. We are obliged to follow rules and follow laws, and there are certain roles and obligations of physicians already. So for instance, the obligation to report something like child abuse or whatever. So in that sense, it's not totally wrong that they're being put in this position. But many physicians do say, who says this is a medical issue? How does the law get to tell us how to do medical practice? Is it really a physician's responsibility to end a life? They're asking that question, for sure. The matter of being obliged to refer legally, that is very troubling, as is the obligation of the institutions to offer this. And this is something that the Catholic Church is coming out very strongly against. They're being very clear, and they are calling it, as of the last report that I saw from the Archbishop of Toronto, intolerance, that it's against their right to religious freedom. So we're finding that there's going to be a conflict. Your first question had to do with abortion. And the truth is there's all kinds of parallels here, but it's not exactly the same thing. Because the question of when a life begins is not quite the same as I am ending your life at this moment. So some physicians do see a parallel, and some say that it's an entirely different question. I would say that at least 2 told me that they are far more concerned about the notion of ending a life than they are about participating in abortion. I did not ask them why. Dr. McLaughlin has a...
Thanks, Susan. I think it's really an important topic. Sorry? Oh, I don't want to eat it. I just want to speak.
Ice cream.
I mean, I have my own opinion on this issue,
Sure.
but I've listened to both sides. The most disturbing thing I heard from you, though, was that the physicians did not give any kind of theological or churchy reflection on this. And it seems to me that's maybe part of the problem. A big part is that the court is speaking in the legal area, now the physicians are talking in the medical area, and now we're talking in the and somehow we're all siloed, trying to solve this issue, but really it's a kind of madness because we've decided where we can go or what the results will be even before we start. So it seems to me the need, I'm just asking whether you perceive the same, the need is for these areas and people and disciplines to begin to talk to one another in a supportive way, one side or the other. I'm not saying they have to come down one way or the other, but it just seems to me that this often happens in our society, that we just leave this to a certain group and assume that they have all the cards that need to be dealt.
Absolutely, and the truth is that theological language offers something here that legal language and medical language doesn't offer. That was my conclusion based on what they didn't say, but it is true, and we have something to offer there. The other part of your question about whether or not we're on this side or that side, we need to come together. The fact is, this is decided. This is decided. It's going to be. So the days of saying I'm for or against are almost moot. The question now is, how are we going to work together and sort this out? This isn't in my research, but you have to think about some situations like Northern Canada, which is very dear to my heart, where you have remote and isolated communities of First Nations folks. How do they want to handle this question? We need to talk with them as well. We have a role there, I think. So there are all kinds of aspects, not only medical, legal, and church. I think that there are whole areas where we should come together. There's also, I want to say, there has been a rush to this because we had 1 year to do it with a 4-month extension from the Supreme Court of Canada. That doesn't mean that there isn't time after for us to continue talking. It's an evolving reality for everyone. So I think that it's not that it's done and we got to cope. We just need to keep working. I see a thought.
Very interestingly, the parliamentary committee was chaired by a United Church minister. I mean, that was a very crafty move on the part of those who wanted this resolved in a hurry.
Right. Now, there was consultation and involvement from the Catholic and Evangelical Fellowship prior to the panel in terms of giving information to you. So a number of voices would have been involved in that, but you're right, the chair is United Church.
Susan, your comment about making or having a faith voice in this process seems again wants to be, as Rob has said, has been crafted away by the Prime Minister declaring the voting on this as a charter issue. And in my opinion, in my belief, faith and conscience override charter. Could you comment on that?
You're saying that faith and conscience override charter? The law of the land would say no. And there is allowance within the charter for a right to religious freedom. But ultimately, we are accountable to the law. So that's what rides.
The law is not correct. I mean, we've examples of countries where the laws were not correct. The blood in the soil of Nazi Germany. It was the law of the land.
Yeah.
But it wasn't right.
It's difficult. I'm not a lawyer, but this is a democratic society. We are accountable to the law.
On another vein, you
Yep.
talked about the psychosocial coercion that people feel, older people might feel, I don't want to be a burden to my family, so I might choose this option for that reason. It's cheaper, or what have you. Did that come up at all, or is that a concern that physicians raise, or?
It was them who raised it, and we know it's true. We know it's true. So yes, they are concerned about that. And their concern was, well, how are they going to figure it out, what's going on here? In a medical situation, how can I figure out what kind of coercion or internal feelings are you feeling? Who might be able to figure that out? The church. The community of faith, who know the person, who care for the person, who are involved in caring for a person in the relationships that we have. We might be better equipped to kind of sort out some of those questions, but we got to be involved.
I think you mentioned that there were a few of those people who were concerned how their colleagues might see them if they decided not to assist with if they decided not to do the assisted dying because of their religious beliefs or whatever. Based on the numbers of, I think it was 23% of the doctors said they would actually do it. Is there concern that there's going to be a rift between, how are they going to feel about the ones who do decide to do it?
So 29% said that they would do it. And actually what the physicians said, I think you misheard it, was that they are not concerned about their peers, that they feel that they will be supported by their peers, and that they are not even shy about saying it's because of religious grounds. Their concern was with the law, not respecting that.
Are they concerned about the few that are going to do it?
No, not that I heard. Not from these people anyway.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. We have amazing